The Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
From the Pacific Northwest in the shadow of the 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever the case may be, wherever you are on God's green earth, if there is one. I'm your host, Mario Magana. Tongue in cheek, I'm laughing because I said that for the first time. Anyhow, mess me up. Anyhow, I'm your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. Thanks for being a part of the show. If you're watching us on Twitch live, thanks for hanging out with us. If you're watching us on U.S. Phenomenon, obviously you're clearly watching us on airmario.com as YouTube as well. Welcome to all of our radio affiliates, KOSW, KGRGRIP, KAPY, and our flagship station, KVI. Something that we always do is we always get into the conspiracies of the different genres. Maybe it's the JFK assassination. Maybe it's the DB Cooper. Maybe it's, maybe it's the, all the different ones, the portals, the 13 steps to hell, the all the conspiracies that I can think of, because none of them I can think of right now. But the ones that are most important to all of us, clearly, maybe even right in front of us. But tonight, I think it would be only fitting to hit one of the most notorious street beat writers, photog beat writers out there who has been pounding pavement for such a long time. Internet sensation, likes to stir up the pot, but not for any reason of his own, but because he just grew at astronomical levels of fame, not because he was looking for it, but because he was doing such a good job and reporting on stories around the Pacific Northwest, around the Seattle area that were just raw, that were just honest, that were just what they were, the facts. No lean, no bias, just straight reporting, old school type reporting. It's not being done as it once was. All right. If you want to be a part of the conversation, maybe you have a story you want to share with us. Tonight, our guest, Photog Steve, will join us in just a few seconds. But if you want to be a part of the conversation, you can always do that by sending us a text, 775-990-5151, or you can always send us a message if you're watching on one of our platforms, onairmario.com, Twitch Live, YouTube Live. It is my pleasure to welcome back to U.S. Phenomenon, Steve Hickey, also known as Photog Steve.
Thank you for having me back on.
Man, it's a pleasure to have you back on. There's so much going on around the Pacific Northwest, around the Seattle area. I know that you're always working different stories, things that we've talked about, evolved from, everything from the guy from, I think he was from the other side of the peninsula who came over here looking for two young ladies. We've covered some gruesome stuff. But what's interesting to me, Mike, about all the stuff that we've covered, there's not a lean man. I love that about how you approach this. Kind of that old school feel, not the entertainment dollar at stake. You're trying to tell the story, the narrative. And I think that in the today's society, it gets lost, right? You don't see that as much because there's these different TikTok stories. And I know that we'll talk about some of that as we're sharing just off air here. You see these stories being told in so many different directions that are misleading informations of how even those, for example, like people from Mexico who may be, like maybe their parents are dual citizens, they have the dual citizenship. They're saying, oh, by the way, this is misinformation. They're saying, oh, you need to have a visa to go into Mexico. That is a false statement. There's so much information, unless it's changed in the last 12 hours, the information is changing rapidly. But we know that there's so much information out there that is misleading. And that's one thing that with your stories and your reporting out there, that they're pretty raw, but they're very honest, and that you're covering them as as a lot of these old school reporters would have done in the 90s and 80s. So I appreciate that. And some of the stories that we've talked about in the past, let's get into some of the stuff that you've been working on.
Sure.
Steve, I know you've been on the streets, and it's always fun to have you back in the studio. What right now do you think is the biggest thing that you're seeing out there? What have you been working on?
So, I've got a handful of here we'll touch on tonight. One's a big one on that Fall City one that I've sat on here and really gone in depth on, that family massacre. We're going to debunk an internet sensation video tonight that was just spread some misinformation about immigration here in the Seattle area. And then I have stumbled upon, for some of you local who've heard about these ATM thefts happening in the few months, that story was far bigger than I think a lot of us realized. And there's been a big arrest now. There's been some big charges. So I want to talk about that tonight as well. I think the first one, if you want to dive into, let's talk about the Fall City situation. So
yeah, let's do that. That story was so just, but it seems like I say this because it touched me in a way, because I was a part of the other Fall City. Was that Fall City with the
Carnation, real nearby?
Carnation, so close by, but with the Carnation massacre of the what was that? The New Year's Christmas Eve massacre is what they called it. Why is that area so? Are we talking this area is just a bad juju?
It's different out there. You don't get the same amount of homicides or violent crime. It is a otherwise quiet area, but it seems like when they go big, they go really big. 5-person massacres is not common. What's thankfully not common. But, we look at some of the other areas and think of, there's the big cities where there's a lot of things happening. 5 people is a lot. 3 people is a lot. 2 is considered a big deal. 5, especially immediate family members, is a really big deal.
And it's devastating because a town of that size, especially Fall City, there was a point in time where I was living in Snoqualmie, and we would drive down to Fall City and hang out, but everyone knows everybody in these smaller towns. And you get that old school, hey, did you hear what happened to Jim? You get a lot of the local town gossip going on. And in this case, this tragic news, this tragic event that happened has taken some very different twists and turns.
Yeah, that's right. So the family, I don't know that they were wealthy or whatnot, but they didn't seem to have any financial challenges. However, the family's gone, and there's really 2 kids left, one who is accused and one who is the accuser. And so when this happened originally, a call came into 911 that this young man, who's now the suspect, says, hey, my brother killed the entire family and then killed himself, and was coming up with a reason why he hadn't been killed. And as deputies are responding, another call comes in. And one of the people that caller number 1 says is deceased is not deceased and made an escape, has been shot, and is at a neighbor's house saying the family's killed, but naming the suspect as the person who's on the phone saying he was nearly a victim. And so when they get there, they start to unpack this. The girl who's at the neighbor's house is a sister of the now suspect. Both parents are dead. 3 siblings are dead. Sister gets transported. She survives. She names this surviving brother. And I keep saying surviving brother and suspect because there is still a court order saying that I can't name him verbally. However, I've posted the documents because, oddly enough, they didn't redact it in any of the documents. So for those of you who follow me, who've had the link to go look at the documents, his name's there. I just can't say it. So the evidence starts leaning back to him. He is arrested. He is arraigned. Then comes first appearance, and he gets assigned a public defender because he really has no money. There may be money in the trust, but grandmother on the mom side's now the executor, and she's probably not going to sign off on that. So he gets a public defender, which is typical. And that public defender, one of them is a lady named Amy Parker, who's a great attorney. I think sometimes when I put these stories out, it sounds like I'm trying to demean her work. I'm really not. You'd be so lucky to have Amy Parker as your public defender. And she is working the case. At that point, they allude to, hey, we're still working the angle that it was the brother who then killed himself. But the state wants to charge him as an adult, and that's going to take time. He still hasn't been charged as an adult. That's part of why they're using that to withhold his name. And very quickly she says, hey, I need to get back in there. I've only walked it once. I need time. I want to bring subject matter experts, all this stuff.
Sure.
And a very rigid court order goes into place. It gets granted. And it says, you can do this. You can't do that. You can't go into this room. You can't touch this. You can't do a lot of things. And she and her team go in there. And when they leave, the King County Sheriff's Department goes to secure the house and says, you did all the things the court order said you couldn't. You moved evidence. You even removed evidence, which was later found not to be true. But we believe you tampered. We believe you altered the crime scene. And this starts off a pretty big firestorm because all this stuff becomes public. This is a national story at this point. And I was kind of luckily, even though I'm this small time internet guy, I'm kind of on the forefront of that one. I've been actually, it's a neat experience to be able to be setting the narrative. Like what we're going to talk about here shortly is not anywhere in the media yet. And so at the time, another hearing gets set to discuss what even happens if they really tampered with stuff and took evidence. What do we even do at this point? I talked to a number of other attorneys in the field who were like, I don't really know what comes next. This is so bizarre. And part of the reason it was allowed was what the attorney demanded was that the sheriff's department would not supervise them in the house. They said they shouldn't be in there. We should be able to have this house without them. And normally that wouldn't happen. There'd be some sort of supervision. So the hearing happens. And the item that was said to have been stolen was just in another room. It had been moved. And I think that was the first part where the sheriff's department, the prosecutor, who had a good argument about tampering, just lost a lot of ground with that. They go into how things had been moved, how stuff had been entered that shouldn't have been. And the judge basically goes on to say, yeah, I had an order, but it's not a crime scene. It's the scene of the crime. It had already been handed over to the family for hours. We don't know that it was ever touched, but it's the scene of the crime. So really my order didn't matter. And it's whatever else they touched and did doesn't really matter. And they move on. And what's that?
Because then at that point, if the family goes back in, everything, it's not, is it still a scene at that point? You know what I mean? Like,
right. That's right. And, there was just from a strategy standpoint, it was interesting to see them want to go back at that point, right? Because you've seen that in cases, notorious cases like O.J. Simpson, where we keep going back to it, something that's been altered, been cleaned. And then it's like, well, furniture's been moved. And then you bring in the jury and they say, well, could you have seen it from this angle? Could you have that? A lot of times a defense attorney is not going to want to go in early. You want to let them do their work, let them touch things and then come in. Well, at that same time, another weird twist happens. The public defense department says, hey, we don't even have the resources to handle this case. We need to refer it to outside counsel. And when that happens, that's something they can do. And then they pay a private attorney to represent that suspect. And I know some people get frustrated by that, but this is a country built on that. You get defense. You may not like the bill, but that's just how it works. And at the time, there was a lot of suspicion, myself included, that I felt that she might have actually conflicted herself. She learned something that now makes it harder for her to defend that person. But they say, no, we just didn't have resources. That's all it is. And so in comes Christian Gestadt, another great attorney. You'd be so lucky to have her. And she takes over. Well, here's the latest thing that's really bizarre is last month, Amy Parker, the attorney for the public defense department, who originally was there and then had to recuse herself.
Right.
Resigned the public defense department and then joined Amy Gestadt's practice and is now co-counsel on the case. She's back on the case. And now we are paying for that. And so the public defense department that apparently didn't even have enough resources before, I don't know that they've been able to replace her. And now we are paying for her anyways at presumably a higher rate. They won't release the records to me. I've even been to down there trying to request it. And they said, no, it'll take months. I can tell you right now, that's not factual. They can have you stuff same day when they want it. When they don't want it, they can drag it out for months.
Why do you think they're dragging it out?
I think that on paper, it doesn't look great. I think that we are probably paying a much higher rate to go through private defense. And I want to reiterate, as I said in the beginning, this suspect deserves defense. I don't dispute that. I think this is very odd that apparently there was no way that Amy could give the time until she quit and gave the time and is now presumably billing a higher rate. It's above board, but it's very, very odd. And especially in a case that's going to have so much scrutiny on it, it also appears to be something that will probably add time as she's now going to have to get back up to speed and delay.
Sure. And because she left and went to a private firm, and at this point, the city is like, well, he needs defense. Mm-hmm. And so they had to go and fine. And they're like, oh, well, It just, yeah, interesting to
I
hear
do
that.
want to. I want to make sure I'm clear. I might have. Amy Parker. So she has Amy Parker Law PLLC. So she may be billing the new, uh, billing as a contractor. I don't know that she's directly employed as a
Gotcha.
W-4 employee, but she is nonetheless. She's co-counsel on that. So yeah, wild twist. There hasn't been a lot of other things in that. These cases have a way of taking a year or two to go through omnibus hearings,
Yeah.
and a lot of it there's obstructions. They'll want things that then take time, and then they have to get another subject matter expert. These have a way of being really big, a ton of attention, and then slowing way down. Same thing
Sure.
with the Bothell City Council member accused of killing that girl up north. That was a huge case, and now there's nothing going on.
I was just going to ask you
Yeah.
about that, man. You're reading my mind. And it's tragic too, because I don't know. I mean, the agreement of what that relationship really was, it's not super unfortunate, in any of these cases, people who may be watching, who follow you, Steve, who, that type, I don't want to, belittle that type of profession or what she was,
Yeah.
if she was a person who worked in the nightclub, the strip club, or whatever that may be. No disrespect, like no disrespect to her. She was doing her job. She wanted to do a job. She found a way to possibly make more. I don't know what their agreement was. It's super unfortunate because when she tried to unravel that relationship of what that entanglement was, it turned tragic. And what's super unfortunate is we have a victim, a woman who's no longer with us, friends who knew her, who had, I mean, it's scary because this happens. I mean, this can happen all the time. There's probably tons of abuse that is going on out here on the streets with these ladies who maybe get turned out. I mean, so bad to say. They take a wrong path. They start looking for other ways to make means. Maybe it's, they honestly, whatever their circumstances are, it is super unfortunate because you have people out there who will take advantage of a situation where they're like, oh, I want to, let me give you a couple extra $100. And then they start to play that role of like, well, I can, that empowerment of like, well,
That's it. Yeah.
it's
I
like,
think whenever you're giving somebody money for that relationship, there's probably a very different power dynamic. The expectations are different. The expectations of what you would expect to receive in exchange for that money is going to be
sure,
much different than what you're going to give back in it because you believe you've paid. You don't owe much else. And so
right,
even if you go into that, these like sugar daddy type of situations,
sure.
even above board, I think then in itself, just that the nature of that is going to have challenges to it,
And look,
even
and
if it's
we're
being
not
written.
here to kink shame anybody because I'm
Yeah,
sure that's part of someone's,
for
forte.
sure.
Regardless if it's, whatever what they may be into. It's just super unfortunate because in these types of circumstances, we have a victim here who is no longer here. She was someone's daughter, mother.
Yes.
She was a family member for a lot of people, and nothing. That case has just kind of gone dry. I mean, what? No movement.
I think the suspect is pretty well cooked based on everything I've seen, but these just they ramp up and they slow down because now there's going to be all this analysis of evidence, and then there's going to be new witnesses, and then as evidence comes up, you want whichever side comes up with it. I don't know what this is purely example, but say a new string of letters that they've written each other comes up, and the prosecutor says we found new letters where he said this and this. Well, that means now handwriting experts are going to come in and the defense is going to try and disqualify. And, those, they just take months. And so each side wants new things to find to build their case. And then that just adds time. And then you could have where, I don't know what the financial situation is for the suspect. And that can lead to a lot of challenges too, where the attorney really wants to push out those things until they get caught up. They don't say that because they're never going to come and say, I'm not getting paid. And again, this is strictly example, but I've seen that where they're dragging on, trying to figure out, hey, this guy's got to get a mortgage or something to continue to pay.
In his case, I don't know. I guess I was looking for. It escaped my mind, but thinking about. I mean, in his circumstances that we've talked about before. I mean, he was bloody. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just. I don't know. As you said, he's probably cooked, but it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that this has happened. Has anyone come forward to you or given you any more tips in regards to other leads to anything like of that nature?
In that case or other cases.
Just in general, like,
In that I found a lot of people who sent me messages that they had sent each other, or just wanted to say what they thought the relationship was.
yeah,
And my sense is, his side was, I didn't do it, prove I did. And he can say, well, I maybe was there and I found her. That's why I called my attorney who called 911. You still have to prove I did it. And how the fluid gets there, a lot of things. And
sure.
what you think is so simple, when you have to then prove it without that person participating, gets problematic. And I think too, there's probably a level of delusion. This person has been successful in business, been small time level of success in politics. They're used to getting what they want. And when they can't easily get it, they pay for it. And now he's not getting what he wants. And so he may be torching his kids' inheritance, whatever's left, if there is any. But in his mind, he's thinking, hey, I've ducked and dodged and dipped and dived before. I just got to figure out a way through this. And I would suspect that there'll be some level of mental health issues in there. Whenever you can kill somebody, I think inherently, even if it's not a clear diagnosis, there's something going on there. And that has led this person down this path.
Our guest tonight, Photog Steve. You can always find him on all the social handles at Photog Steve 81. Steve, what's interesting to me about all these different cases, if it's not, the Falls City case, the one that I talked about, the, Carnation,
Mhm.
you start to go back and you think about, have you ever thought or spent any time, and this is, I'm going to throw a wild one at you, of just like, I know that they have the 50th anniversary of SNL,
Mm.
and they did the Nirvana came out with Post Malone, Post Nirvana
Mhm.
is what they called it, and fantastic piece that I thought Post Malone did a pretty good job, trying to be as curt as he could be.
Mhm.
It's never going to be the same. No one,
Sure. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah.
it is. Have you ever looked at that case because of how that one,
Ooh.
or even like entertain the idea of looking at that case? Because I know that there was a documentary that came out called Soaked in Bleach. I've tried to have the guys come on and talk about it. Um, they're reluctant to come on to talk about
Mm.
about the documentary itself. I, I look at that. It does look suspicious on how Seattle police went through this. I, to me, it felt like, as looking at the case now, because I was so young at that time. I mean, 96 when he passed away, I believe.
Yeah.
So I was already close. I mean, I was a teenage. I was 18 years old, I believe. I was close to it.
Well, you're older than me then.
Yeah. Yeah. Was it? So I was 17. I was just turning 8, something like that. Because now I'm 47. So, um, that watching that documentary really, it's hard to imagine when you look at that case, how much heroin they found in his body, how he was still able to pull the trigger
Mhm.
on this said shotgun. And these were levels on which I don't know that anyone could be coherent. But again, we're not Kurt Cobain either. We don't know how much heroin that much, as I hold my breath, as I stop myself from saying, but to be able to consume that much and
Yeah.
still be able to, pull something off like that. I don't know. It just, to me, if you ever go, to me, it felt like Seattle was like, it was suicide, boom, off.
Yeah.
And then it was, and it was like, okay, he was a junkie. He killed himself. Did they really look at it? Did they look at all the pieces?
I've looked, so not that one particular. I haven't even seen that particular documentary, but those of us who grew up in a certain time remember that case really well. It was a very big deal.
Yeah.
The thing that I've ran into, so, I've had families, I get a lot of requests now. Hey, would you come look at my, loved one's cold case? And
Like
what
Tamika
makes those,
Lewis. Like
What's that?
the Tanika Lewis one would be.
Tika Lewis, yeah, she came up, and now she was really happy with that new chief coming in. She's not, and that chief's now on the way back out. That didn't work out very well. But a lot of my work right now relies on professional investigations and the paperwork that comes from that. It's very hard to go and unpack what's already been done. You have to get participation from all those investigators, participation from the prosecutor's office, and you have to get new subject matter experts. And I feel like, and again, I didn't see that documentary. I don't know their means and methods, but it can be really easy to poke holes if you don't have full participation of the people who did it the first time. And I have found in a lot of these, I call them up and they go, "Yeah, man, just do a public disclosure. I'm not going to sit down. I'm not going to do any of that. And what are you going to do with that? I don't have subpoena power." And it's frustrating in some of these cases. There are groups out there that are phenomenal at going through this stuff, but I would love to sit there as a fly on the wall and find out, when did you kind of get that tunnel vision? We all get it. We all get it. And if you don't have somebody overseeing you saying, "Hey, did you check this? Did you check that?" it can come up with some challenges. And so that's myself. I know myself, I'm guilty of that. And that's what's had me nervous of, like, if I went into this kind of solo without a team or somebody, in my ear the whole time reminding me, would I just lead myself down the wrong path? Or out of sympathy for the family, they've already got their concerns. You go in with that on your mind, and inherently you're already down a path. And so how do you do that as an individual?
In looking at these cases, I think what the struggle too is making sure that you're still being objective. I think is what like making sure you're and you don't go down a path where you're like, you become tunnel vision, and then that's the only thing that you're looking for. You're looking for the puzzle pieces to fit that narrative. As
look at the Menendez brothers, what's come out of that. And now we have competing pieces with completely different paths, and both look pretty solidly done and thought out. And then you still have prosecutors coming back and going, "No." And the people who have all the records and the documents coming out going, "No, you're missing this." And I think that's always been my fear is especially when you're somebody who's good at the storytelling, which I think is kind of one of the skills I have that a lot of videographers or stringers or whatever you want to say, that, they're good at collecting info. They're not good at the storytelling. Storytelling in itself, even if you're, unbiased or whatever you want to call it, you are still finding a narrative. And if you put 10 people on the same thing, you're going to have 10 variations of the same thing.
Sure.
And I think that's just my fear is, do I go in there and either get lucky and uncover something, or just tear apart good work, or what that is? And I don't think I'm at a point yet where I could do it solidly enough. I hope one day to get there when I have a team of people and we can say, "Hey, we want to commit resources to this, get everything we have, and start interviewing people," but we're just not there yet.
I can see you being another version of like an unsolved mysteries Pacific Northwest version. I shouldn't even say that because I know that there's already a TV show.
I like what they do because they at least leave it open ended. They're not telling you it's wrong. They're saying, we don't know what to make of this, right? The unsolved mysteries concept, I kind of dig. That's more my style of, I'm going to take you down a path of some things that I found that are interesting, but the conclusion's not there yet.
With the homeless population being still, what it is in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, still, I guess, still egg on our face. It seems to me that there has been some movement shift to kind of clean up like the Sodo area. I definitely travel that area more frequently. It seems to me that you're starting to see pockets of where the city's trying to get control of itself again, to kind of clean up the area, to kind of restore order in Gotham. It feels that it's still hit and miss on Third. We know it's still crazy over by the Ross. Is that right? Is that where everybody hangs out? Why do you think that the city doesn't, or what is it resources? Do you think you just don't think that Seattle still has the resources to clean up that area? The Third Avenue piece.
I think we're still along. I mean, so far there's two components to it. I think there's the political and then there's the solution. And so what I think we had before was an administration that was feeling like, I'm not going to play politics until I have a solution. And now you have an administration saying, hey, we'll give you visually what you need, whether there's a solution or not, because they realize, I think once you get the faith of the people, you can get them to do, lean the way you need to later. I think what the current mayor is doing is savvier from a public perception standpoint. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that he's actually solved anything, except the fact that you can walk on some streets you couldn't walk before.
Right.
But the numbers are still increasing. Arrests are up. There's other things going on that I think can help. But he is much better at understanding what it takes to get reelected, what it takes to keep support. He's got a very different city council now. And I think those things will continue, will probably get him another term. I think he is going to run again. I think he's probably going to be successful. But he's just playing a different game.
Not when you're making basketball jokes, though.
That was terrible. I don't know what the hell he was thinking there. I don't know if he's still, he must know. I hope in my heart that he's, somebody like that who knows our history, that he knows something we don't. And he thought that joke was going to fly, but that was bizarre.
That was
for those of you who follow, if you saw, he made something about, he pulled a basketball out like he was going to make an announcement. He's like, I'm kidding, and put the basketball away. I put it in my Instagram story, and my Instagram stories is kind of a different part of my life. It's more where just my sense of humor, fun things I find funny. They're not even news related. And I got hundreds of people just sending me DMs about how pissed off they were that he did that. I was annoyed. That's why I shared it, but I was really surprised at just how angry people got of a guy who otherwise doesn't seem to catch. He stays out the radar. He doesn't seem to really work people up, but man, one joke that really got him.
And that one's tough because you're talking about 17 plus years now of no basketball. You're talking about almost you're talking about a generation of kids who grew up with no pro ball in this town. And people say, "Oh, we just go to Portland." No, that ain't gonna fly for me. No, yeah. I'm not. I'm not Portland. I wasn't a Vancouver dude. No, L.A. not my thing. There's a song about the Supersonics, and Ice Cube did. No, we're not. None of that. So anybody who's listening to this that's over 55 is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Ice Cube did the song called "Today Was a Good Day." It's a 90s thing. It's great. It talks about the Sonics and Lakers beat the Supersonics. Anyhow, these are things I've dabbled in some NBA since, but show me NBA. You're bringing back my team.
Yeah.
And until then, I don't want to hear jokes. I don't want, you're talking about 17 years of 17 years of not having basketball.
Yeah.
It's not okay. That's the thing. But until it comes back, yeah, poor joke on his part.
He also, I've worked around him a number of times. I don't know that he would be able to pick me out of a lineup, but I've worked a number of things where he's a speaker and asked some questions. He's good. You don't get him in a gotcha. And that thing that he did up there, he brought a prop. Like, he thought about this.
Yeah.
And still did that. And I was just like, what the hell? You came here with that planned out. What are you thinking, man?
Yeah. And clearly it didn't go well for him. But
no.
It's interesting because when, walking the streets of Seattle to get back to the mayor and how it kind of perception looks on the streets, it's different. Something feels different. I know there's still a lot going on, but something feels the vibe. If it's a presence with, a mobile unit on 3rd next to the Mickey D's there, and what used to be the old Macy's, which is, I don't know what's going on over there. The whatever they want to call that old building, the Bon Marché Macy's building, because that's how old I am. And I know that Frederick and Nelson used to be the Nordstrom building. I mean, so that's, it's just something feels different. There's still a lot of movement and a lot of activity pushed over to the other side. I don't even know how the hell McDonald's stays in business over there.
Yeah, it sure tells you, for Starbucks, pick on them for a second, I guess.
Sure.
They've been closing locations saying we can't be profitable. And these are some of the busiest locations possible. They're saying security outweighs it. I don't buy it. I think, if McDonald's can make it work, Starbucks can make it work, because you couldn't have a tougher spot and more security, but they're like, but we sell burgers all day long. It's just part of it. They don't really have they don't have anything else there. It's just people come in, they grab it, they go, they buy the cheapest stuff on the menu, and they make it work.
What's interesting, I don't even think I think it's just a walk-up window now. I don't think you can actually go
Yeah.
into the facility, because I remember back in the day that you could actually walk in there. It was a whole thing. What's interesting to me when you think about how the city has kind of moved, you move like further towards like the Seattle center. Uh, I know across the street they put, the McDonald's that was over there on Broad is now moved over to it. Now it's not on Broad, but it's over by across the street from this from the Space Needle over in the plaza
Yeah.
over there in Como Plaza. That I thought, to me, that was going to bring more transient, and maybe it has. But do you feel like when the perception of what is going on right now with crime going up, do we feel like, because I feel like, oh yeah, it feels safe, but is it because there's a presence of the police and making arrests that they're catching people now, or are we still seeing, was this like from previous administration where they weren't making those arrests because now you're seeing a presence of police taking action in regards to what may have been from a previous administration saying, hey, look, we're not doing that, we're
Yeah.
not making these arrests, now we're going to start making these arrests if it's gang crime or whatever the case may be? Are we seeing, like, don't ask, don't tell, not more, we're just going to turn the other cheek? Or do we feel like these crimes that we're catching now and these arrests are because of what was in the past? Or do you feel like this is just separate? We're still, nothing's really changed. They're just making these arrests as they
Yeah, I
come.
think that there's an industry that isn't talked about much that I've been working on some stories on. I might even do some promotion for. So we've had private security for some time. What has really developed in the last year to 2 years, but really in the last year, are these private security firms that are not like the what is it, Gravitas or something, whatever they are, where it's just people driving around like little Priuses with flashing lights. There's now groups like Blue Line Patrol and others like that, that what they're using are commissioned officers who are either reserve officers or part-time officers. And why that matters is they can actually affect arrest. They posture much differently. They are armed. They are able to handcuff you. They're able to take you into custody and then hand you over to police. And that industry has started thriving downtown. They do cost more than some of the others that are more passive. But the other good thing I think about them, I sound like I'm promoting them, but I have started to get to know these because I've been trying to understand this. When you're dealing with these officers, these are not young officers working tons of overtime because their union wouldn't allow it. These are more farther down the line. A lot of the reserve guys are ones who've put in 20 years and they're just wanting to make some side money that they're allowed to do now that they're on reserve status. They are they're calmer presence than I think you got with some of when you get the private guys who were wanting to become cops at some point and it hasn't worked out yet. Sometimes you get, a little bit more unpredictable and they end up going viral doing some wild shit. These guys don't do that. But they can affect arrest. And so they don't just report, they actually intervene. And that's been a much bigger thing downtown. They also look like law enforcement when they're armed, and they'll put officer on their back. That they'll play with that term a little bit more, because I don't think they have to change the wording just a little bit so people don't think that they're actually police, but they look much more like police. It's a very different presence, and it does seem to be something that businesses are willing to pay for, and there's a lot of them available now.
When I think about this and about businesses paying for this, we know that was it Ben Bridge that moved their location to a different piece? They were closer to Westlake. I think they moved. I don't remember where the hell they moved, but I know they moved. They're more towards Pacific Place.
Mm-hmm.
So so I guess they moved just on the other side. They're still in the general area, but was it more? Do you feel like they moved because they were closer to the muck, and they just felt maybe of a business decision where it moved closer to retail? It still feels like there are patches. Like I'm losing my hair, and I'm trying to comb over, that spot. I don't know how else to, describe it. it feels like in patches of the city, it's dark.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. It's vacated. It's like an open void, where the FAO Schwartz was, and like some of these other places that are no longer there. I think even like UW, the bookstore isn't there. Just a lot of stuff still, the Men's Warehouse, and a lot of this seems to, like, I don't want to feel like it's crumbling, but I
Mhm.
don't feel like I mean, we're like 5 years past COVID,
Yeah.
past that, are we going to see a city? I mean, is this going to take a decade for the city to rebuild itself to be thriving again, where we're not seeing, where people aren't in fear of, like, I don't want to go downtown because it's so ugly. I don't want to be by the stadiums because I can't park in the Seahawks, tailgate alley because, I got the White House over there, or, just, it feels like to me like people aren't willing to put up with the BS anymore.
Mhm.
People who live out in the burbs are saying, you know what? I don't need to. I'm going to spend my entertainment dollars somewhere else. So they go to a show or center, or they're going to Climate Pledge. They're still doing these things, but they're being selective. They're not spending their dollars like they did back in the day in a mom and pop store. I should say in a brick and mortar store, not a mom and pop, but in the brick and mortar, as you would go through the corridor of downtown. I don't know that we're ever going to see that ever come back like it once was, where you see like a Nike town, Nike, and, these businesses that had built these 20-year investments, they're vacant, they're gone, they're empty silos of buildings, like was it North Face that was on Third Avenue that no longer is there. You do see some other places, but
I don't
I
know how much of it is a perception of the city and how much of it is the change of shopping habits as well. I feel like, this is more of a national thing outside of even the city too. A lot
sure,
of those places, it took work to go there anyways. And now with the way it is where you can purchase things other ways, return
sure.
policies have gotten easier, better. I think that there's a component of that. There's certainly people who didn't want to come to the city, but I don't know that those people were coming to the city before. The nightclubs, yeah, that I don't know there. I don't have the same kind of feel that it's a habit thing on the night side. Um,
Well, that whole
I,
industry has really changed too, though.
yes.
And
I mean,
and
even not that long ago, that's where you went to meet people. Now you don't even need to do that. You can go there with somebody. You're probably going there with somebody you already met, and more than you're going there to meet. And so, that the whole demographic of it's changed.
but
Um,
there's not a lot of nightclubs that are still open in the
right.
city. I mean,
Right.
a handful, maybe three, maybe.
Experiential type of other things have also popped up too that didn't exist back then that people seem to like to do. You get
The
the
hookah
great deal is not
lounges.
something you do frequently, but those types of things where you go down there to try other stuff, I think there's a drive to do more.
And when we talk about experiences, I mean, we're seeing different things change around the city. What do you feel like right now is the pulse of what's going on? What do we feel like? Are you What are you feeling right now in regards to how things have been? Do you feel like there's something that's coming up? Anything you might be able to share that you think is going on with the city? If it's nightclub versions, I mean, I know there have been shootings outside of some of these nightclubs, stabbings. There's some, like you said, there is still crime going on.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's not slowing down anytime soon. Even if it was, it's still usually going to be over a decade's time. You
sure, and
know,
the narrative of maybe these nightclubs maybe shutting down if eventually the city is able to, put a thumb or, pinch them out, these different nightclubs and whatnot. Who knows? I mean, and someone who's been a part of that industry on the backside, working in as a broadcast engineer, you spend many of times. I mean, I could tell you, I've been at 3 shootings at these night. They're
sure.
wild. Um, So of all the conspiracies that we've talked about, all these different things, well, that means some conspiracies, but any updates on our good friend? I say like you and I know him, but we don't. Maybe I don't. And it was tongue in cheek when I made this reference the last time. I was like, "Hey, do we know anything about our good friend Gary Ridgway? Any updates other than him taking a field trip back through nostalgia to go, and do we feel like he was playing us?"
I don't know if he was playing or I go two ways. So he could have very well been playing. I think there was also some concern that so much has changed. He was going out there off of his memory. I don't know if he ever had a shot at divulging whatever he planned to divulge. I feel like for them to have devoted that much resource and that much to it, they had more than just a hope. They thought they really had something. That was a pretty expensive operation. Now, something may still come from it, but it's gone silent. The other side to that, too, that's the King County Sheriff's Department. And the King County Sheriff's Department, from a media and public communication standpoint, has really fallen off. I've started mentioning that in some of the stuff I put out, where usually I kind of stay away from that. But they are just not communicating whatsoever. They don't seem to be concerned if the public does or does not know about things. They don't seem to see the value in talking about what they're up to. It's very odd. You know, we had another situation this weekend. A guy out on Highway 509 northbound in Burien killed a young lady, a young mother, and it's vehicular homicide. He's in custody. He ran out of the vehicle after he did it. He hit her at about 100 miles an hour. She was doing 55, 60 going northbound 509. He and the other occupants. What's that?
Wrong way, right? Is that right?
No, he's going the right way. He just, when you're going 100, you can rear end somebody at 60 and still end their life.
Sure.
And the other occupants all ran, and they're all in custody now. Well, come to find out, he's got previous DUIs. He had felony warrants, wasn't even supposed to be out. And he also was being pursued earlier in the night, and they had to terminate the pursuit due to policy. Now, whether or not you feel that pursuits make sense, put that aside for a second. Sure. Let's talk about the agency. You have an agency that is designed to do certain things, such as pursue and stuff. This is the perfect opportunity for them to get on their stage and say, hey, we tried. We wanted to do more and we couldn't do it. And not only are they not doing that, they are silent. Silent. It's bizarre. We've got tonight, recently there was a shooting on a metro. There was another shooting tonight on a metro situation, by the way. There's another one just about a couple hours ago, but a week or so ago in Tequila. And they came out and they sent out a PIO, and it was just very odd. It's like, don't you want us to help tell these stories? You should want that. You should want the public to help you find the suspect. You should want things that you feel you need to make this stop, and you're not even trying, while other agencies are out there all the time. And so the Ridgeway thing may be a little bit of that too. I really can't tell. They may have had a success and just didn't give a shit to tell us.
When we talk about that, is it administration? Is it from the top down? Are we talking, you know what I mean? Like, are we seeing something where we're like, oh, okay, maybe this is coming from the top down, where you're like, you know, who's in charge? The King County Sheriff is like, you know what? That's not a part of our thing anymore. We don't, you know. Yeah.
I wish I had a firm answer. My gut is yes, because it's not like being a public information officer is not a side gig. That's actually a title. There's somebody getting paid to do this. It's just not being done. I'll go. I said I normally don't like to go on beef with agencies. Tequila. What the hell? Like they are one of the Tequila is one of the spiciest parts in the state. They don't get talked about a lot, but they are actually far wilder per capita than any other area. And their PIO is busy taking selfies. That's all I see him do. I have reached out to him repeatedly for comment on stuff. And for those of you watch, you say, well, you're the social media guy. They don't have to go. I can call anybody and get a return call. I don't usually get cocky like this, but I'm telling you right now, I can call just about anybody and get a return phone call. I can't out of Tequila. It just won't. And then I'll see him put a selfie up the same day. And I sit there and go, well, what is different here? Now Tequila has a very different type of demographic. Their voting base is different. They have, most of their housing is landlords who don't even live in the city. And I think they just kind of feel like we don't really have anybody to message to. And then you get to areas like Pierce County who know, hey, you may have to vote on a levy. You're going to be otherwise turning to the news, and we want to get ahead of that. So they hammer it all the time, and they promote themselves on there too. I mean, at the end, it is a government agency putting out what they say happened. There's always going to be some level of propaganda when you let them do it themselves. But Tequila and King County seems to be going that way. But there is somebody in Tequila who is a PI. I'm not going to use his name right now because I'm already kind of calling him out. You can look him up. But, he does cop stuff too. But what the hell, man? Like, we're paying somebody, and you answer high up. That's not a high authority position, but it answers directly to authority.
When you talked about King County, it made me think of two things. The case of the young girl that they found on the side of 509. I think that was around that was after the pandemic,
Yep.
but people still were like in that very viral social media. Let's share information. There's a serial killer out loose. I mean, this is the stuff that I was seeing during this
Yeah.
case.
It went viral on all the local,
It did. It
memes
did.
type stuff. Yeah. And it took them like a week or two, and they just acted like, well, no, we didn't have anything to do. It wasn't that. And it's like, well, then get on it, man.
What I think what made me think of a serial killer on the loose was then them finding a body
Yeah.
in the Duwamish nearby.
Mhm.
And if you're familiar with 509 and Duwamish, it's I believe they found that by the Duwamish Bridge or the South Park Bridge. I think that's what it was, the South Park Bridge. For those who are listening on, at one of our affiliates, this is kind of the industrial area where this body was found. By the plant, by plant two, old plant two, the bridge there, the South Park Bridge. But what made me think that this is when I went into, was this a serial killer? Because that body, there was no information that was there was
Yeah.
very limited information about that. So I was like, oh, was this individual a homeless person who was possibly, they were like, oh, it was someone from the homeless encampment from that area, and maybe they just kind of dismissed it
Yeah.
and not said much. I just could not find any information. I reached out. I kind of went. I've even called the West Seattle blog asking if they had any information. They had nothing. And then that's when I was like, wait, are these two? Are they working on a serial killer? Like, could
Yeah.
this be a serial killer? And I was like, do we live in a time and day and age where this is even remotely possible to be living in a time where there is so much social media that there could be a modern day serial killer?
It's a good point. So I'll tell you on this end, when that happened, the girl on 509, and there was this idea that there were two other bodies, that she was the third. It went around enough that all of us in this circle started calling each other. So,
Right.
I'm not competition with the stations or anything like that. I
Right.
actually supply them with a lot. I was calling them going, how did we miss this? And they're like, we don't know. We're trying to find out too, because I'll tell you, you really cannot process a body, a crime scene in King County without one of like 15 people knowing. And I'm one of those people, because we're listening all the time. But we also monitor the decedents list all the time. We know what the cause of death is for everybody. And we're going, did we miss it? And we had ourselves second guessing, and we couldn't have, there's no way. And then we started going through the county, and the county's like, oh, we'll look into it. And you're like, what do you mean you look into it? Well, because they weren't even really taking it seriously. They themselves thought, is there something we're missing? Could it have been a state patrol thing and maybe we didn't get it, or somebody's got geography off, whatever. And it was that lack of taking it seriously that could have nipped it in the butt really early. That went on for a couple of weeks. And then by that point, it got so big that to try and, quell it back down took a lot of effort. And there's that people thinking, well, of course they're saying that, right? They don't want us to know. And it's like, man, if this has just been dealt with a statement up front,
Sure,
it would have been so easy. And so in the sheriff's department, when they did do the statement, I believe they just tweeted it, something to that effect. And so
that's correct.
where you'll get, one of the stories I'll tell you about here next, this one with ICE, like when they want it out, they'll actually reach out to me and say, hey, can you help us get this out? Because we really want to get ahead. And they were kind of like, we tweeted it. What did you want from us? It's like, I don't know, to calm down the people who voted for you guys to be here. Like, what?
It just made me think of what you were saying earlier, that this is not a new trend. This is something that's been going on for quite some time. As voters, we have the right to know what's going on. And not only that, but that was someone's daughter.
Yes.
That was someone's child. And I, as a father of a daughter, I was like mortified. I was just terrified, and just was like, I mean, look,
there's also internally a large component. You can't fit it on a spreadsheet, so they don't always really think about it. But there's a huge morale component with the people working for that agency when they're able to get their work put out there. And when they're not doing that, the amount of frustration that I have heard from within the sheriff's department right now going, hey, we're out doing cool shit. We're kicking the shit out of stuff. And they're not telling the public, and the public doesn't even realize what we're dealing with every night. And hearing that, I was like, man, I never really thought about that. There's this like hidden morale component. And if you're not worried about that, what else are you not worried about?
Right. Our guest tonight, Photog Steve. I need to write a number down for radio purposes. 5454. Before we end this tonight, there's been so much misconception about something we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, on social media, I think I've seen so many different posts. What's interesting is you're hearing and seeing visually people trying to help others in regards to, here's where this agency may be. This is, I think people are starting to put their ear to the, people are starting to inform others via social media when we're starting to see ICE in different locations. I know that I was at a happy hour somewhere and someone was talking about how they saw and were reporting ICE to be in the international district. If I don't know if that was to be true or not, but people are starting to put this type of information out there. Hey, watch out. If you're in the international, if you're in ID, here's where you're going to see ICE, hey, so if that's a thing that is now happening, Steve, there is so much on social media that is right information, misinformation. Let's talk about this next case that you had posted and talked about recently.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I guess I'll give the quick 3-sentence kind of preface. ICE is absolutely coming. I'm not here to minimize that or say it's not an issue or you should or should not be concerned. But let's be concerned about what's actually happening, or choose what to be concerned about. We don't need to, make it something it isn't. And that's what started happening is these videos went out. And so a video went viral that was shot on February 3rd. It took a little bit to pick up after that. There was a young lady up in the 14300 block of Aurora Avenue North Seattle. I believe she's in a restaurant, and she sees some unmarked vehicles come up, people with vests and stuff descend on an individual, take him into custody. And as she's shooting it, she's saying, I can't believe this is happening right in front of me. I believe she truly believed that was ICE, by the way. As I put in my video, I didn't name her. I don't think there was malicious intent, but she posted it. And then it took off. And then some of these kind of meme groups that I've had my content on as well started sharing it. And it got going so much because it was like, oh, they're here. And since this started, since the administration has come in, myself and a lot of others have been trying to monitor this because we know it's going to get here, especially in a city like Seattle. That is a sanctuary city. And that's not me casting a term. The city of Seattle themselves say we are a sanctuary city.
Right.
The president will be glib when it picks up out here, and we'll make sure everybody knows. And it hasn't picked up yet. And so when this came up, as I talked about earlier, how certain agencies will say, hey, we want to get something corrected. Department of Corrections started reaching out to the media. I have a release here and documentation that went to everybody, and nobody wanted to talk about it. They just let this go. And what they said is, hey, this video went viral, and it's actually us. And if you look, none of them say ICE. They're going to say ICE. And what they did is they apprehended a man named Jerry Brown, and he was a level 2 sex offender on DOC community supervision for rape, failing to register as a sex offender. He was also wanted for new warrants for attempted rape, unlawful imprisonment, and second-degree assault. He is an American citizen. There was no citizenship issue whatsoever. They took him into custody, and he's being processed. The agencies that were involved was ATF, U.S. Marshal Service, as well as the DEA. Now, I don't know that they all showed up that day, but they collectively share intelligence. These are actually common operations. They happen more than you think. They even went so far in the release to give a picture of him so people could match it to it, as well as his information. And so I put the videos, kind of gone around. I think it'll do more than the original viral post that I found. But, sometimes when I do these, I think people thought, well, so you don't even care about people getting deported. No, it's not about that. There is truth, and then there's not truth. This is linear. It's binary.
Right.
When it picks up, I will absolutely cover it. Absolutely. Right now, ICE does not seem to want to play with anybody who is not either national media or Dr. Phil. We've been trying. We have all the TV news, myself, we've been reaching out saying, hey, we want to go ride with you. We want to see what you're doing. You are doing arrests. They're putting stuff out on the Washington ICE page about people they're arresting. Let us come with. Well, so far, Dr. Phil was the only one who got a yes, and some national outlets. They're being very protective of it. We are trying. We want to show it. And when the numbers pick up, whether or not it's because we're getting a ride along, we'll absolutely tell you about it.
Sure. It will be interesting to see how that plays out. You know, from one administration to the next. I mean, it's, it's a thing. I mean, regardless, I mean, it's going to happen.
That's right.
Man,
no need
Steve,
to make it before it is. Let it be real.
right, for sure. And make sure that we're covering it correctly, or
Yeah.
making sure. And that's the thing. I mean, everyone has a camera now, so I mean, it's so easy to get video. Boom, and her defense. I mean, yeah, like you said, she thought she saw what she saw, and
I don't even have an issue with the video going viral. That's going to happen. I think that's where the media could have stepped in and made a 30-second mention, put something on their website. They don't even have to take airtime. Do something.
Sure, on the social platforms and
That's
push
right.
it out, right. I'm trying to think of anything else that we may have missed. I know that we've gone over these cases, the cold cases. I know I know I saw on one of your social posts that you're working some of these child cases that the what is
ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force stuff.
This one. So devastating. I know we briefly talked about the Tanika Lewis, and I know that she has not been found yet.
Mhm.
It is that case to me. I don't know why I've held on to it for such a long time. I remember being much younger during that time, and when that happened, it was just like, how does this happen? I mean, it can happen to anybody.
It was an odd thing when her mom reached out to me, and the fact that because it was like part of my life was learning about their life, and then to this many years later have her message and say, hey, would you be willing to look at this? And she mentioned it. She brought up the name as if I wouldn't know. And I was like, oh my Tika Lou. Oh my gosh. And I was blown away by it. And but it's, how do you help? But she was really excited about the new police chief at the time. And it sounds like he had her feeling optimistic, and then nothing really came through from that.
It's just, in a lot of these cases, a lot of cold cases are around here in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many there are, but there is a ton. And in regards to wherever you're at in Washington, Oregon, or wherever, Steve, it's like, I mean, just the same thing. Like, we have no idea what happened in Gary's piece. What was really going on? Is it that because Gary's getting up in age?
Yeah.
Does things that we don't know? I was like, oh, does he have cancer? They're trying to get more information out of him before he dies. Look, we all grew up with a monster. If you're from the 80s and 90s, you grew up with this guy who worked at, a trucking company, who lived in SeaTac, lived close to Tyee High School, off of Kent Des Moines, or the military road.
Mhm.
I mean, I look through all these things in my life, and I'm like, holy crap. I was around this individual for a long time.
Yeah.
Most of us who lived in the SeaTac, Des Moines, Burien, Tukwila area, he patrolled the streets. Not that there was a lot of ladies of the night that are working Pacific Highway in this area anymore. Regards to like
Back then, though, yeah.
Back then, from like 188th all the way down to 216, or maybe even Kent Des Moines, because he would pick them up and scoop them up and take them down. And what's so unfortunate about this thing that I don't think anyone really talks about was some of these girls weren't even ladies of the night. They were runaway victims. They were like children running away from home.
Yeah.
That piece doesn't get talked about. Like we're talking 14, 16-year-old young ladies, teenage girls who are no longer with us because they, had a falling out at home and were runaways, and this was their way of means. It just devastates me that there was this monster out there who's not out there now. But what's interesting for King County to show or have him in the presence of this county and not sitting in a jail cell rotting for his alleged crimes that he's admitted to, pleading guilty to, on it's just like, do the work. If there's something out there that you're going to try to get him on and say, hey, we want to give him the death penalty, go do the work. Don't ask him to say, hey, this is mean, being like voicing my personal opinion, but to me, it felt like a field trip. That's what it felt like to me. He came out because I don't feel like we got a lot of information. Nothing was said. Oh, Gary was in town, and it was almost like it was pushed to the side. To me,
the timing was odd too. The timing of it being, we had Reichert running for governor at the time. Reichert's big part of his resume was saying that he was part of the task force. And so that was in a lot of his campaign stuff, was that he was part of taking Gary Ridgway down. There have been disputes as to what role he really played, but that was nonetheless what it was. And at the time, I think when you and I talked about it, then I said, I get the sense that Reichert and Ridgway probably have some sort of interesting relationship. And I don't mean that in any kind of just negative way.
Right.
But when you have somebody chasing somebody like that, it is an interesting kinship that's developed between the two of them. And I have wondered if Ridgway had almost offered him an olive branch, like he was going to help get him a body so he could put that on the campaign trail. And some of you may roll your eyes at that, but it's not that far-fetched in those type of relationships where you have somebody who was taken down and then tries to do something back, but then it never materialized. I mean, in the end, it didn't materialize.
It just seems so interesting to me that the timing was just a strange time. And I was like, well, maybe Gary's close to end of life.
Yeah.
And he wants to, kind of.
Well, he did get old, didn't he? We haven't seen him in 20 years. And you get that picture like, oh my God, he's an old man now.
Right. And to think that he, was a member of society, living a functional life, garage selling, because my uncle said, hey, I used to go to his house all the time.
Yeah.
All of us had there are stories of people who have interacted. What's interesting, I have a buddy who he got a ride from Gary Ridgway off of 200th. He's like, hey, he pulled over and picked him up, and he got to the top of the hill on 200th where the Bullpen Tavern was, and he saw there was police presence, and my friend was like, hey, I can just get out here. And Gary was like, yeah, that's great. And let him out. And I was like, man, I mean, was Gary going to kill my buddy? You know what I mean? We just don't know.
And sometimes he liked to really push the limits. There's a chance he had somebody dead in the back of the truck. He used to keep him for some time. And he was also, he's a documented necrophiliac. So he worked at Kenworth and Renton. He would have a girl that he killed in the back of the truck, drive her around for a bit before he'd get rid of her for days. And I think he got a charge out of that. And then he would leave on his lunch, have sex with the body, come back, just put a tarp back over it in the canopy in the back. And then that would happen for a few days before he would then drive out and get rid of her. Some of these people get charges out of that, whether your friend had a risk or not, or if he was just a pawn at that time to get that charge that I'm driving around with somebody who doesn't even know I have a body in the back.
True.
There's all those layers to it. And I think it's that too, the necrophiliac stuff. I think you get so fixated on, okay, this guy killed somebody. He did a lot of wild stuff, not far from people. You go on a lunch break in Renton, you're not going very far. You go back and park. There's hundreds of people working there and there's a lot of people who are around some wild stuff, even outside of just the homicides alone.
And what's interesting too, because he's not far from the Duwamish Green River. I think in that area by South Center, I think it's the Duwamish. I think my understanding, I think that's what it is. But further back you go, it's the Green River. So depending on where you're at, if you everywhere from the gorge through, and it's weird because when you look at his mapping, it kind of was like very methodical, and then it got
Mhm.
sporadic.
He would change his method. So he would do things like he would change the tires on his truck after he'd get rid of one, because he would also drive out. A lot of them ended out in the woods, and he would dismember them and put different parts all over the place. So sometimes they're only able to recover parts of them. And then with the tire changes and changes of his shoes and things like that, he would continue to kind of pivot. The thing that caught him, for those who may not remember, was because he worked at that Kenworth plant. They have a very, very specific chemical makeup of a paint that only that plant uses in the entire United States, in the world, and probably in the world. And they finally found some of this whatever the chemical. Yeah, they found this chemical on one of the girls. And that was what connected. I think they had gotten him somewhat on their radar at some point, but they were like, it's got to be him. But until then, I think it's easy to think back 30 years ago, well, they didn't have DNA. They didn't have all this, so you could get away with anything. You really couldn't. There were a lot of people getting caught for lots of, there was a lot of good police work. But when you have no connection to your victim, when you were going through steps like willing to buy new tires every time, when you're putting parts around, and when you are somebody capable of driving around with that for days, you don't do the things that others do that then trigger getting noticed.
It's just interesting because DNA was, like he must have been very methodical about not leaving any DNA evidence behind in regards to bodily fluids, things of that nature, hair. I don't know how the hell he got away with what he did for such a long time, where they could not pinpoint him to these cases where, like Ted Bundy, the bite marks, things of that nature, leaving imprints on victims of vicious things that this monster was doing. They had the evidence, to be able to say,
I should have looked it up tonight. They just identified Jack the Ripper off DNA.
Oh, they did.
Yeah, I forget exactly who he was. He was somebody who'd been on the radar. I bring it up because it leads to something else. So one of the stories I do want to get out, hopefully this year, is going to Coitus and the other groups that do these, do DNA and other types of testing. They have advanced so much in the last couple of years. They're saying that though it's not cost effective, we are months, if not, somewhere under a year away from there being the ability to have a machine, a box that you could do DNA testing in the field with and get an answer right there. You could be testing steering. You don't have to have fluid. The samples could be much smaller. You could test a steering wheel that was just touched and figure out who stole the vehicle. Now, it doesn't make sense financially to do that, but
Sure.
That's where the technology has gotten to, that they're saying we're going back to cases just 2 years ago where there was a sample and it was not viable, and we can now test it. And I think even as you find more bones or whatnot in the woods, you may be able to link it back to Gary Ridgway from 30 years ago by getting something that was left behind there. Yep, there you go.
It's interesting case, huh? So here we are looking at Jack the Ripper. And this was a scary one back in the day.
It was
obviously way before,
They got it off a family. These DNA banks is how they got them. They matched it to somebody alive today and then worked it back from there.
Wow. Speaking of unsolved cases, I love the fact that they are now coming out with the evidence about who they think D.B. Cooper was.
Oh, yeah.
And they believe it was Richard McCoy.
Yep.
And to me, I'm like, I probably shouldn't even be doing the show anymore, because my daughter's like, Dad, it was Richard McCoy the entire time. And when the evidence came out, I was like, oh, there it is, honey. There it is. Now you know.
Yeah.
So as we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest, I'd like to thank you, Steve, for hanging out with us. You can follow Steve on all of his social platforms, Photog Steve 81. Steve, before we leave, any cases that you want people to if is there something that you want people to kind of keep their ear to the street? If they got some information, anything you're working on that you might need some help with?
I I don't have any that I need help with yet, but I will here in the next week. There's a couple of families that lost loved ones in shootings that feel that they haven't gotten the traction they need. There's a lady in Auburn who lost her son last year, and we are going to start. I want to talk to the detective first before putting out what we have, because sometimes I think that can be helpful. Sometimes it can also not be, but I want to get that out and see if the public can help. I got a big one coming out tomorrow on a faculty member with Archbishop Murphy up in Everett. And I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I don't normally go after the employer, but they had a guy charged with just atrocious stuff. We're talking infants and toddlers. And they have decided that they don't really owe any even sort of a statement. And they kept him on their faculty list until I started calling them. So I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow. And then the guy, we've had these ATM robberies happening out here in Seattle, these big ones with heavy equipment. There was a lot more to that story. Turns out he got over $1 million in just 3 heists. He had probably somebody on the inside, and that one's going to come out here in the next couple of days. And just a wild crew. It was a crew of 4 people doing some wild stuff. I think we're talking, for those of you who've been around for a bit, Hollywood back in the 90s, robbing banks.
Yeah,
we're talking that kind of a scheme.
Interesting to think about. If you are a subscriber to the podcast, thank you so much. If you're not, please do so you can hear the entire podcast experience versus the radio experience, which is a very much condensed and shorter version. Steve, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you'd like to be a part of the show, or if you have maybe a suggestion of a show topic or idea, please send them to me, 775-990-5151. We did get a text in, but he was asking for us to cover way different topics. And thank you for sending your text in, but he really wanted us to go down the rabbit hole of conspiracies and presidential conspiracies of those natures. Maybe we'll do that next time. For my entire team, Mark, Christopher, well, we better thank all of our affiliates, KOSW, KAPY, and our flagship station, KVI. For my entire team, Mark, Christopher, Sophia Magana, and myself, Mario Magana, be sure to look up at the sky, because you never know what you might see. Good night.